Breaking news, as Israel and Hamas have agreed to the first phase of a ceasefire and hostage deal that could pave the way for an end to the bloody and brutal 15-month war and the release of American hostages. You are looking here at reactions to the news of the agreement, which was celebrated by Palestinians in Gaza and Israelis in Tel Aviv. U.S. and Qatari officials announced the contours of the deal this afternoon, which is set to happen in 3 phases, starting with a 6-week ceasefire that would see the withdrawal of Israeli forces from populated areas in Gaza and the release of women, elderly and wounded hostages held by Hamas in exchange for the release of Palestinian prisoners. President Biden says American hostages will be among those released in this first phase. There are 3 American citizens being held in Gaza who are still believed to be alive, and we will speak to the father of one of those hostages in just a moment. In his remarks announcing the deal, President Biden laid out the details of the next 2 phases of the agreement, which are still being negotiated. We should note he accidentally referred to Hamas as Hezbollah during part of his remarks.
More than 15 months of conflict that began with Hezbollah's brutal massacre on October the 7th. More than 15 months of terror for the hostages, their families, the Israeli people. More than 15 months of suffering by the innocent people of Gaza. Fighting in Gaza will stop, and soon the hostages will return home to their families.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office says there are still some unresolved details that they hope to finalize tonight. Israel's Supreme Court would then have 24 hours to appeal this agreement, meaning the earliest phase 1 could take effect would be Friday, with the first group of hostages being released on Sunday, a day before Donald Trump takes office. The president-elect celebrating the deal on social media after publicly threatening that all hell would break loose if a deal wasn't reached by the time he took office. President Biden crediting Trump's Middle East envoy, who's been part of negotiations in recent days, as an important voice in these talks, noting unity.
Before I take office.
All hell must be paid if they don't release the hostages.
You know what that means, don't you? Well, do I have to define it for you? Look, all hell will break out. If those hostages aren't back, I don't want to hurt your negotiation. If they're not back by the time I get into office, all hell will break out in the Middle East.
Can you elaborate?
And it will not be good for Hamas. And it will not be good, frankly, for anyone. All hell will break out. I don't have to say anymore, but that's what it is. And they should have given them back a long time. They should have never taken them. But I tell this, I don't want to hurt the negotiation. If the deal isn't done before I take office, which is now going to be 2 weeks, all hell will break out in the Middle East. Okay?
Thank you, Mr. President.
You've done a great job.
Thank you.
Can you tell us what you said to Prime Minister Netanyahu in your call on Saturday?
Yeah.
Putin since your election?
Well, I'm not going to comment on the Putin question, but I will comment on Bibi. We had a very good talk. We discussed what is going to happen, and I'll be very available on January 20th, and we'll see. As you know, I gave warning that if these hostages aren't back home by that date, all hell's going to break out, and very strong.
Mr. Netanyahu, about a ceasefire deal, you said if they don't have one by the time you take office, there will be hell to pay.
We're going to see what happens.
Have you spoken to Mr. President? Do you have too much
They better let the hostages come back soon.
You do have a member with you right now. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Kira. Look, I mean, the demonstration down here just outside the IDF headquarters is over, but we're going to talk about Afir Calderon. You can see his smiling face there. He's 54 years old. He's a hostage held in Gaza for more than a year, a father of 4 taken from the Nir Oz kibbutz on October 7th. And we're going to talk to his cousin, Ifat Calderon. Ifat, thanks for talking to us. Let's get your reaction. What is your overriding feeling now that you know that there is this deal for an initial 6-week ceasefire and the release of 33 hostages in place?
It's really complicated feelings because I'm happy for the 33 that's supposed to come back. I don't know if Ofer is still alive or not.
Okay.
I do believe he is, but I don't know.
It must be so hard.
Yeah, it is. And as you said, the 4 children that are waiting for him at home. It's not done till it's done. Like, if we're not going to get back all of the hostages alive and the dead ones, we haven't done anything.
Is it that you won't believe that he's going to be freed until you literally see him in the flesh and you've got 100% confirmation. So are you still sort of full with anxiety and on tenterhooks tonight, even though we've got this major news that there is this deal?
Yes, I do. I'm like, yeah, it's like I'm really trying to look at the big picture.
The deal to release the hostages in Gaza is on hold. Less than a day after the announcement, Hamas is making new demands.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the terror group is creating a last-minute crisis. Paul Strand has more from Jerusalem.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu accuses Hamas of making new demands about which Palestinian prisoners will be released in exchange for the hostages in Gaza. He says his security cabinet, slated to vote on the deal today, won't meet until Hamas drops back down. Wednesday, crowds cheered in the streets of Gaza when Qatar's prime minister made the announcement of a ceasefire agreement. If Hamas does drop its objections, the deal's supposed to take effect in 3 stages, with the guns going silent and the first 3 hostages coming out this Sunday, 2 of them Americans. More of the 33 hostages, who are over 50, female, children, or sick, will then be freed every few days in the 6-week-long first stage. After 16 days, more negotiations begin, which should see the rest of the living hostages freed and the war permanently ended. In exchange, Israel will release around 1,000 Palestinian prisoners, including many terrorists serving life sentences for murdering Israelis. Israel's foreign minister points out it's tough to accept a deal leaving Hamas terrorists in power.
But if we will postpone the decision, we don't know how many of them will survive.
Hostage families are reacting with a combination of joy and dread, rejoicing their relatives may be freed soon, fearful that many may never come back.
I really hope that it won't end with only 33 hostages returning home, but all of them, because everyone must return, both the living and the dead.
Netanyahu first called President-elect Trump to thank him for getting the deal done, and then called President Biden. Both Trump and Biden are taking credit for the now-threatened deal. Trump declared on Truth Social, this epic ceasefire agreement could have only happened as a result of our historic victory in November. Biden says the plan was first advanced by his team, but said the incoming and outgoing White House teams worked side by side.
Let's continue to pray for the release of the hostages, but something significant will happen on Monday. And what a difference a day will bring. His vow is that the hostages are still there. Watch out. And so we'll see what happens in the hours after his swearing in, what will happen to Hamas. In my view, Hamas should not exist anymore. They're trying to regroup. They're trying to rebuild. To release to them 1,000 terrorists is just absolutely unimaginable to me. But that's the deal on the table. Let's see if they take it. But if they don't, come Monday, it's going to be a different story.
Pat, Trump just ended war in Israel. All right, let's take a look at this.
This is a massive deal, weeks in the making, Alex.
It certainly is, if not longer, Pam. We have been waiting for more than 13 months since the last ceasefire deal and since the last time there was an exchange of hostages and prisoners for this moment, that they would agree to a deal. All of this, of course, brokered after intensive negotiations with the mediators, the United States, Qatar, and Egypt.
Now, the reporters are actually asking Biden if Trump is the reason why the fight between Gaza and Israel just came to a final halt. And it seems like he just reacts to that stuff. Let's take a look at what he has to say here.
Secretary of State. Let's listen.
Good afternoon. It's a very good afternoon. Because at long last, I can announce a ceasefire and a hostage deal has been reached between Israel and Hamas.
Wow.
More than 15 months of conflict that began with Hezbollah's brutal massacre on October the 7th. More than 15 months of terror for the hostages, their families, the Israeli people. More than 15 months of suffering by the innocent people of Gaza.
I mean, he's the one who is funding it, right? He was the one who is sending in missiles and all the weapons and money and all this stuff. And he just talks like, well, more than 15 months of suffering for all the people at Hamas. It's finally ending.
Gaza. Fighting in Gaza will stop, and soon the hostages will return home to their families. The elements of this deal were what I laid out in detail this past May, which was embraced.
I don't know why, for some reason. Okay, just watch Kamala Harris and watch this dude. It just seems like they're just holding back their laugh for some reason. I don't know. It's just something I kind of just can't stop looking at these two. And, you know, Kamala just looks so much like she's about to laugh. I mean, she could just break out anytime, start laughing. Just look at her. Look at their expressions.
And endorsed
the controlling
overwhelmingly
laugh
by the UN Security Council. The deal is structured in 3 phases. Phase 1 will last 6 weeks. It includes a full and complete ceasefire, withdrawal of Israeli forces from all the populated areas of Gaza.
6 weeks. 6 weeks of ceasefire, it seems like.
And the release of a number of hostages held by Hamas, including women and elderly and the wounded.
That's
and I'm proud to
nice.
say Americans will be part of that hostage release in phase 1 as well. And the Vice President and I cannot wait to welcome them home. In exchange, Israel released hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. And during phase 1, the Palestinians can also return to their neighborhoods in all the areas of Gaza. And the surge of humanitarian assistance into Gaza will be...
So both are basically exchanging hostages at this point. And we don't know if the ceasefire is going to last forever. And one of the major reasons why is because we don't know. Probably Israel was not invading Gaza completely. They were not destroying the entire place and taking over it completely. And the only reason was because they had their own hostages that are currently stuck in there. And what happens if all the hostages are now released? Could the issue actually get escalated? That's the big question, because all unpredictable stuff that just keeps happening all the time. We don't know. This could eventually get escalated, maybe not. Anything could basically happen. So it's going to be a very interesting couple of weeks to see what kind of, new decisions are made.
Can have a greater access to these vital supplies. During the next 6 weeks, Israel will negotiate the necessary arrangements to get phase 2, which is a permanent end of the war. Let me say it again, a permanent end of the war. There are a number of details to negotiate to move from phase 1 to phase 2, but the plan says if negotiations take longer than 6 weeks, the ceasefire will continue as long as the negotiations continue. I've spoken to the Emir of Kuwait.
I don't know if the ceasefire is going to be continuing for longer, man. Honestly, that's what they always say, but it doesn't end up happening. Because one or the other parties, they might end up doing something reckless. Hamas hits Israel, and then Israel starts bombing them and bombarding and all that stuff. It basically that's basically how all of these things starts up, and it just keeps escalating to a point where Americans get involved in affairs that doesn't really relate to them, and that's usually why I think wars just keep prolonging. I think if America just stays away from all of this stuff, I think that would actually do much better. I think they're capable enough to take care of their own countries. I think America should stick to their country problem, and rest of the country should stick to their own country's problem. I don't know why, for some reason. They just get involved in all the places. I mean, California is burning, Los Angeles burning, and he only offered like $700 to every house, and then he offers $6 billion to Ukraine for funding their war progress. And can you imagine? They could have literally just rebuilt the entire place with that kind of money. United States, it just gets into places that it usually doesn't need to, but then it happens. They could have just taken care of their own people, but no.
And the president of Egypt. And we have pledged to make sure the negotiations will keep moving forward for as long as it takes. Then, when phase 2 begins, there will be an exchange for release of the remaining living hostages, including male soldiers, and all remaining Israeli forces will be withdrawn from Gaza.
Okay, so all the hostages are not released at once. So male hostages are still going to be kept in there. So right now it's just the women, children, and elderlies that are getting released, by the way. So that's the main information that we needed.
The temporary ceasefire will become permanent. And finally, phase 3. Any final remains of hostages who have been killed will be returned to their families, and a major reconstruction plan for Gaza will begin.
major reconstruction plan for Gaza will begin. I don't know how the reconstruction thing is going to happen. I mean, like, for some people who know about the scriptures and what Israel is going to be doing in terms of constructing the third temple, I don't know how that all of those things, the prophecy stuff, is going to work out. Probably Israel is still going to try in order to, get into Gaza and try to build that stuff. But it looks like, things could eventually escalate.
I introduced last spring. Today, Hamas and Israel have agreed to that ceasefire agreement.
All right, now comes the part where the reporters are actually asking whether if Trump should actually get the credit for Gaza ceasefire. It's going to be interesting reaction from him.
Because the president sees the future of Gaza now, as you were saying, the implementation of this deal will be in the hands of the next administration. And basically, they will shape the future of Gaza. So how do you see this future? And also, how much credit do you give to the Trump team for this deal? Trump is already taking credit for it.
Well,
Trump is already taking credit for it, is what she says. I mean, that's true. He's been posting all the tweets saying that, well, we have finally broken peace in Gaza and, Israel. And that's funny. It's going to be a funny reaction. Let's see what he says.
This is the exact framework of the deal I proposed back in May. Exact. And we got the world to endorse it. Secondly, it's America's support for Israel that helped them badly weaken Hamas and its backers and create the conditions for this deal. And thirdly, I knew this deal would have to be implemented by the next team. So I told my team to coordinate closely, the incoming team, to make sure we're all speaking with the same voice, because that's what American presidents do. Thank you.
He didn't even answer the question, like, how much of the credits do you give to Trump?
How many Americans will be released when the hostages are being released?
All the exact detail of how many people are being held, how many bodies will be returned, and will all be forthcoming. All of it. Thank you.
That this deal will hold.
I'm confident. Thank you.
Looks credit for this, Mr. President, you or Trump?
Oh my God.
Is that a joke? Thank you.
Oh boy, look at that stuff.
So keep your head